Wil Lutz is no longer the kicker of the New Orleans Saints, and Bradley Roby's about to hit the open market. Let's talk about the craziest moves the Saints have made this Tuesday, right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? It's your host of the Straight Up Saints podcast, Chris Vogel, and as always, this program is brought to you by Scott Fickner Injury Lawyers. You've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore. Scott Fickner handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. Now, roster cut deadline today for every NFL team, not just the New Orleans Saints, obviously. And that means some tough decisions have to be made. And that's not something that surprises us because we all know, especially those who were very attentive to the preseason and very attentive to training camp, that the Saints had a lot of tough decisions to make because this is a damn good roster and there were some battles to be had. The main one, though, was actually the kicking battle because you could say cornerback 2 with the Debo and Alante, but we both knew they were going to be on the 53-man roster. With kickers, you were never going to hold 2 kickers. And for the Saints, between Wil Lutz and Blake Grupe, a decision had to be made. And one was made this Tuesday. The Saints decided to trade Wil Lutz to the Denver Broncos for a 2024 7th-round pick, which makes Blake Grupe the de facto starter. I'll get into Grupe for a second, but let's just start off with the Wil Lutz side of things. First off, I want to make sure I don't come off as ungrateful or someone who didn't appreciate Wil Lutz's time with the Saints. Wil Lutz, for a long time with New Orleans, gave them stability at a kicker spot that they didn't have for a lot of years, and they were missing that. And Wil Lutz was excellent. And I think Wil Lutz, I'd say from 2016 all the way to 19/2020, was still a damn good kicker, one of the best in the league. And if you go back and look at his numbers, particularly during the 2018 season, made 93.3% of his field goals. He was outstanding. But there was a drop-off. And the drop-off started towards 2019, and it wasn't bad because it went from 93 to 88.9, I believe. So that's fine. But he got injured towards the end of that year. And that injury bled into 2021, where he misses it, 2020, where he goes to 82.1%, which bleeds into 2021, him missing time. And then 22, 74.2% of field goals made. Not great. So there is that downward trend. And that was a big reason why I was kind of nervous about keeping Wil Lutz. But Wil Lutz played great in the preseason. He played great in training camp. And that boosts his stock because you're starting to think, is the old Wil Lutz back? But there is other factors to this. There's the age. He's 29. Blake Grupe's 24. And there's a contract. He's making around $4 million. Blake Grupe doesn't even cost $1 million for the Saints. So at the end of the day, Grupe is cheaper. He's younger. And if Wil Lutz does not revert back to the Wil Lutz of old, he's probably at the minimum better. And honestly, and maybe this is just too much optimism coming from my side of things, I think Blake Grupe showed enough in the preseason and in training camp that right now you can argue he's better. I don't think cost came into this for the Saints because at the end of the day, it's a 7th-round pick. And saving money should not be the goal for a team that's trying to win it all right now like the Saints are. So I think the Saints looked back at this and said, Blake Grupe's been the better player. And I said this on Sunday night after the preseason finale. I thought that Grupe should be the starter. And then I said it Monday. If Blake Grupe doesn't miss a 60-yard field goal in the preseason, which he had the distance, he just pushed it a little bit to the right, there's not a single person vouching for Wil Lutz. And if you are, it's because you're afraid of change. And that's fine. And I've said this before. If people wanted Wil Lutz back because they like the familiarity, I respect it. And I respect it even more when people are honest about it. For me, though, I don't like the idea of a kicker who is kind of, over the last couple of years, the trend is going downward, is getting older, and is a little expensive. It just, for me, it doesn't all add up. Wil Lutz is still a starting kicker in this league. I've said for the last couple of weeks, the Saints have 2 starting kickers in a league where a lot of teams don't have 1 starting kicker, which made it a luxury. So the Saints got a 7th-round pick back. Do not complain about compensation. If anyone does, you're wild. This is a kicker we're talking about. And honestly, if Wil Lutz does not revert back to Wil Lutz, it'd be a steal of a trade anyway because it's a 7th-round pick that you can use to move up. You could throw the dart at the dartboard blindly and maybe get lucky. Saints have gotten lucky in the 7th round before. Think of a guy like Colston. And for Wil Lutz, if he's what he was last year, a 7th-round pick's ridiculous because teams wouldn't trade for a player like that. You're banking on him being better. And now we'll see. He's going to be in Denver. The altitude should help in terms of getting distance, but distance has never been a problem for Wil Lutz. I think he's always had the leg. Now it's about the accuracy. But overall, for me, I think the Saints made the right move on paper, and now Blake Grupe needs to reward the coaching staff for them keeping him. But I think he deserved to be the starting kicker. I don't think there's a doubt about it. Now, let me switch over to the other big move that was made today. Bradley Roby, he gets cut. What a wild sequence of events. I never thought of Bradley Roby not making this roster. I always thought he was a certainty to make it. But then it comes out this morning, Jordan Schultz says that the Saints are receiving trade interest or fielding calls, I think it was. And then you go, all right, I mean, I don't love it because I don't necessarily love the depth behind him at slot corner, but all right, let's see what happens. And then Bradley Roby puts out pretty much a farewell message thanking the Saints and their fans. And then he gets cut. And that is one of those where people go, oh, why'd they cut him if they could have traded him? No, they couldn't trade him, and that's why they cut him. They didn't get anything. Forget about anything that's worth their while. They clearly didn't get offers because teams probably said, hey, you might just release him anyway. And he's old enough that he'll hit the open market. He won't have to worry about going through waivers. And he should have significant interest for teams that want a slot cornerback. Now, from New Orleans' perspective, I guess it's one of those where you're going, okay, Alontae Taylor will start in the slot. They also like what Ugo Amadi showed. And I like what Ugo Amadi showed, so I want to give him his props. But for Alontae, it's a move that I personally, just like I said, I think the Saints made the right move getting rid of Wil Lutz. And logistically, it all adds up. The Bradley Roby move, to me, is confusing because I don't know for certain that I could say right now that Alontae Taylor's ready to be the starting cornerback in the slot. I think Alontae, look, last year he primarily worked on the outside. Marshawn Lattimore missed time. And I know we talked about Alontae being able to play in the slot. That's one of the main reasons we liked him coming out of college in terms of versatility. But I just have question marks about whether or not he can just turn it around because he looked bad in the slot at times during the preseason. And that's the preseason. So how is this going to match up in the regular season? Now, I love the idea of banking on youth. I love the idea of banking on athleticism and talent because I do think talent wins out in the NFL, and Alontae Taylor's got a lot of talent. But does the light bulb just switch and turn on in a week's time? Like, does he struggle in the preseason and magically it clicks? I don't know. Again, I love the idea of the Saints having their three most talented cornerbacks on the field at all times. And I do think Bradley Roby is no perfect player at this stage in his career. He's towards the down slope, just like Wil Lutz would be at kicker. But it's an interesting move, and I really, really hope it doesn't come back to bite the Saints in the ass, but it's the one that out of all the moves they made today has confused me the most because I love the talent of Alontae. I just don't know if he is a slot cornerback. And I know that he could play on the outside because he showed it last year. So that's where I'm at with that move. I'm a little bit confused about it. I understand to some degree what the Saints were trying to do with this, but it's a big ask. It's a really, really big ask, and we'll see. But Alontae and Ugo Amadi probably be the guys in the slot, and I'd imagine it's got to go to Alontae Taylor because the Saints have been trying to make that shift. It hasn't been an effortless or seamless transition, I should say, for Alontae, but we'll see. Maybe the kid just turns it on. Maybe he's one of those gamers that when week one comes on, it's great. Underlying note of all this, though, would the Saints have gotten rid of Bradley Roby if Marshawn Lattimore wasn't ready for week one? I would say no, because you might have Alontae and Adebo on the outside and then maybe Roby in the slot with Ugo Amadi helping out. But if Lattimore's ready for week one, then you're maybe not worried about getting rid of Roby and you feel like you have the depth. So maybe if people are looking for positive and all that, it might be that. Marshawn Lattimore's knee injury might not be bad enough to hold him out of week one. Don't quote me on it. I just think if you're kind of reading between the lines, that's where I end up. That's what I see. So we'll see what happens with New Orleans here, but a fascinating first half of these roster cuts. When more news happens, we'll break it down here for Brew Crew Media and on Straight Up Saints, but it's a fascinating time. And as always, guys, I'm curious to know what you guys think, so let me know in the comments below. Did the Saints make the right moves getting rid of Wil Lutz via trade and then releasing Bradley Roby? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. And as always, stay tuned for more content here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.